My name is Thomas Christie, and I'm a retired educator of 43 years. I taught at Lincoln High School, sociology and history, and the last 20-some years I was an administrator. Um, I was administrator at Northeast High School for 4 years, and then 20-some years I was in the superintendent's office. I was in charge of multicultural education. When I came to Lincoln, went to Whittier. I'd never gone to school with white kids in my life before, so it was different. It was a different experience. But I had lived in a big city, and I lived in the inner city, and it had been pretty rough. I was going to go back south, but my sister had migrated here with her husband, who was in the Air Force, and they ended up staying. I feel like I was born a teacher and definitely born a sociologist, because people have always amazed me, and with my diverse experiences of living in the South and the inner city and in Lincoln, I just felt that I could interact with all kinds of people and that all people were connected. I just had that feeling. So I took that into my classroom, and my philosophy was that I tried to treat my students and my athletes the way that I would want my children taught. And also, I tried to integrate, infuse as much non-traditional Eurocentric history into my classroom. Sometimes they question it. Sometimes adults would question things because it was new to them. They thought you were revising history, but they had only known their story. I was a history and sociology teacher. So, black cop Pete Peterson, who kind of took me under his arms and mentored me, and he was also the first black city council. So that was a big deal. But then after that, there have been 4 or 5 blacks since then that have been on the city council. So when I think of it, Shoecraft, I think of Robinson, and now there are 2 on there that are on the city council now. So and there was one before that. So there have been progress from that standpoint, you know. It was pretty red line. You couldn't, I mean, people did not live outside of, black people wasn't living outside of the Malone area. I remember when some of the black people wanted to move, people dumped trash when they moved outside of Malone area, dumped trash on the yard, including Colonel Adams. But I've seen that progress now. African Americans live all over the city now. But Malone is still kind of the hub. It's kind of when people come, they want to know, okay, you know, where's some things where I can get some cultural kinds of things. There's quite a few black churches that still exist. So churches are not as integrated. Most black folks probably attend black churches, but there are some churches that are integrated. Young people, it's the millennials now that really give me hope. With the George Floyd killing, I watched all around the country, all around the world, and like I said, being a sociologist, I'm constantly watching human behavior. But what made that so different than what I observed in the 60s and lived through, I marched some, and even in Lincoln we marched, like when Dr. King was killed and so forth. But what I noticed about that I think threw a lot of people off who don't believe in that much in diversity and so forth, was that it wasn't like the 60s. The 60s was 90-some% people marching were blacks, and it was basically, you know, there would be a few white ministers and some students, but this was different. It didn't matter what city it was in. You look, you had 40 or more people that were not black that were marching. So that tells me that there's progress. Even in Lincoln, you realize, you know, the qualities of Lincoln and how receptive it can be. Yes, there are issues. There are always people who are not as positive when it comes to inclusion and diversity, but overall, Lincoln tends to be somewhat of a welcoming city, I think.